Happy early Father's Day, everyone out there. This is Dylan from Dylan Knows, and this is my weekly video show. It's actually been 2 weeks since I did a show because last week, unfortunately, I was unable to do my comic show because my co-host, MJ Khan, had a emergency he had to deal with, but he and I will be discussing comics next weekend, so that'll all be good. It's also a primetime show, which I've done a couple times, and they're always a lot of fun. 9 o'clock, we can get away with a lot more stuff than we do at our usual 12:30 Sunday show. Hence why I wanted to play father figure, Jerry. So.
No, that's not what the song is about.
But anyway, this week is my list show with my co-host, Jerry, who I just showed you. Say hi, Jerry.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Dylan.
Hello. Let's see. I saw you last weekend at Snark Stock, which was great. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So that was cool. And I don't know if you've heard, but I have a proposal for one in Baltimore next year around the same time. So I'm working on that one now. So that'd be pretty cool. So that's pretty cool. If you want to know, for those who don't know what the heck Snark Stock is, Tony Solo and I did an episode of the Snooze on Thursday, which talked all about it. So go look that up. Type in the Snooze, SNEWS, and you'll probably find it. Anyway, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about lists. This is our list show. Our list show is every month when we do our show, we pick a topic and we do top 10, top 5, top 3, top 20, whatever of a certain topic. And last month for Mother's Day, we did top 10 mothers and pop culture. We had a really good conversation, some good lists here. So I said, you know what? It's Father's Day month, we may as well do a top 10 dads of pop culture. So I think we'll get started right away since it is prime time. And yes, it's still Saturday, but we want to have, we got, long weekend. We want to rest. We want to sleep in. We want to do all kinds of stuff. So we don't want to stay up too late. So without further ado, Jerry, what's your number 10 of your top 10 pop culture dads?
Okay, so my number 10 dad isn't an official dad per se because he's more of like an adoptive dad. And he is Bernie Mac from the Bernie Mac Show. And the reason why I say that is because the premise of the show is that Bernie's sister has to go to rehab and has no one to care for her 3 children. The father is out of the picture. So Bernie and his wife, Wanda, decide that they will take in the 3 kids who are Brianna, Jordan, and Vanessa. And I believe the show was, mid-90s-ish, that range. Anyway, I really like that show because, he's flawed. He's a flawed person. He plays a stand-up comedian on the show as he was in real life. He has passed away, R.I.P. But he was very old school, and he would kind of threaten them when he got angry, just the way a dad would be like grumble, grumble, grumble. But what was really cool about the show was there was this technique he used, which is very common now, but not so much then, where he would actually face the camera and talk to the audience. And sort of I can't believe these kids, what they did to me, blah, blah, blah. And I just really like that whole mix of he was sort of grouchy, and he would get mad at them, really, really mad at them. But he loved them, and he cared for them, and he wanted them to succeed. And it was just this nice, marriage of the two, and very typical of, there's a lot of dads who are like that out there. So Bernie had to be on my list. He's my number 10.
And that's good because, and we discussed this last month, with a lot of the top 10 moms we did, dads were all doofuses or morons or, just weren't really good dads. And as you know, I went off on that topic a little bit because I think that's a ridiculous stereotype because I'm a dad and I'm not, I can be a doofus, but I do it in fun, but I don't, I know how to change diapers, I know how to take care of my kids. I'm not, my wife isn't the one who has to do everything. I help out as often as I can also. And we work, as Dawn likes to mention a lot, we are a team. So I'm glad to hear that, your first, and I think that's what we're going to do for all our lists, that most of these dads are probably not these doofusy dads,
right?
Because there are actually a lot of good dads out there. And Bernie Mac is a good one, the old school type style guy, teaching them, tough love, but you need to have that in order for the kids to not be assholes, to be honest, because that's a problem nowadays. Is if you've ever gone out and gone to places where these kids run roughshod over their parents, when they get older, they're going to be assholes. I'm sorry, they are, and they're not going to. And you need, no matter how much it pains you and how hard it is to do it, you need to discipline your kids. You need to be tough to them, and you're going to make them cry. That's just the way it is.
Yep.
Don't make them cry and then give in and say, oh, I'm so sorry. Here's a present. No, that's not working, because then they're just going to think, I'll just cry and then they'll give me stuff, and that's not how it works. No, they need to learn that they're not always going to be able to get everything that they want. And also that we know better, because our parents taught us what's right and wrong, and we're teaching them. And even though it might be cool, hey, let's go jump on the bed, let's jump on the sofa. Yeah, but at the same time, what if you slip and fall and you're going to hurt yourself, break your arm, your leg, you're going to hurt you're going to break the furniture, you could do damage to yourself. So it's good to have those types of tough love type of dads, because being tough doesn't mean you don't love them. And, Bernie always backed them up when he needed to and helped them out. So that's a good number 10. My number 10 is an interesting one. It's also from a TV show. And I picked him because I like the character, and becoming a father changed his character ever so slightly. But it's just really funny. My number 10 is Maurice Minifield from Northern Exposure.
Okay.
Now, for those who've seen Northern Exposure, don't know about Northern Exposure, it was a show from the early 90s about a Jewish doctor who could not afford medical school, but he got a scholarship from the state of Alaska, which basically means the state of Alaska would pay for his medical education. And in return, he would spend 4 years in Alaska medical care for free. He would be put up in a house and had a stipend, so he would be able to, but he was basically working off his medical, his education bills for the state of Alaska. So the main character is Joel Fleischman, who is this guy. So he's expecting to be working in Anchorage, which is one of the biggest cities, if not the biggest city in Alaska. And it's a typical city. So, I mean, that wouldn't be so bad for a guy from New York. But no, instead, he gets shifted to Sicily, Alaska, which is a small backwoods town with a population of about 900 people, lots of Native Americans, and lots of just mystical type of stuff. And it's a fish out of water story. But Maurice Minifield is an older gentleman. He is a Korean War veteran. He was an astronaut, part of the crew that tested the Mercuries, and but had his ticket punched to go to the moon, but they canceled the Apollo program before it was his turn. So he took his formidable wealth that he had, not only from being a soldier and being an astronaut, but he was also he got an education for being a really good businessman, and he had amassed a huge fortune, bought a ton of plot of land in Alaska, and basically bought the town of Sicily. And what his plan was the plan for him was to turn it into, what's the phrase? I forget the phrase of it, but the Sicily of the North or whatever. Make it a gorgeous, lively city with restaurants and nightlife and movie theaters and stuff like that. But at the same time, you really didn't see him working too much about trying to do that too much. And then there are even some episodes where he's sort of like, I don't know if I like the idea of having this infrastructure and stuff like that. So he was kind of wishy-washy on the subject. But the most important thing, and why he's on this list, is he never was married, and he never had kids. He was an uncle. His brother had kids, but his brother died, and he had no one else in his family. I think his brother died in an accident that killed his nephew also, so he had no family left. And Maurice is one of these guys that's obsessed with legacy. So he always wanted to have a kid of his own of some kind. So his first shot of it was he was going to adopt Chris, who is the DJ that he hired to work at the radio station that he owns, because Chris is a former prisoner who was in jail and escaped jail and is living in West Virginia, has been living in Alaska, not in hiding so much, but is just sort of, hanging out up there. And he had no body. So Maurice was going to try to make him his son, but that didn't quite work out. So in the third season, which is still one of the best seasons of television you're ever going to watch, the Christmas episode, Maurice gets a visit from 3 Koreans. It's a older lady, a middle-aged man, and about like a teenager. And the teenager is the only one who can speak English. And we discover that this teenager is his grandson, and that his dad is this middle-aged Korean guy who doesn't know how to speak English. And the woman is his grandmother, who is the mother of Maurice's son. And so Maurice, who is, and the other thing you got to know about Maurice also is Maurice is highly racist, and he doesn't. He's a nice guy, but he throws off racist things all the time. You know, when he first meets Joel, he's like, "I'm glad we got a shot at a Jew doctor from New York," and he just said it like it was normal conversation.
Right.
So of course, he's like. Eventually obviously he takes a paternity test to make sure that it's true, because he does have this wealth, and that it's not just, and that's the first thing that goes through his mind, is that this woman is trying to take money from me, so claiming that this is his son. And so if she comes here saying, "This is my son, you owe me lots of back pay for alimony," like that, he's going to get screwed. But that's not the case at all. He just wanted to meet his father. He did not want money. He just wanted to meet his father. And so paternity test proves that he is the father. And so now he has a son that doesn't understand English. And he's Korean, which is a double whammy. But at the same time, it's his legacy, and it's his son. And eventually in that episode, which is the Christmas episode, is fantastic, he eventually connects with the mother again and remembers her from his time in Korea, because he didn't quite remember her, whatever. But he finally, something clicks in him, and then he remembers her, and he just softens, and it's just so great to see this glow in his face. And then there's a great scene where he's bonding with his son over arm wrestling, and trying to they're at the bar, and he's trying to have a conversation with them, and eventually it works out. He finds out he's an electrical engineer, so he's really smart and he's really strong, because Maurice is one of these tough Texas, guys, and he almost loses to his son, but eventually he's able to pull out some power. But he's like, "Wow, you're really strong," stuff like that. And so he finally has his legacy, and it softens his racist tendencies now that he actually has a Korean son. And so you're like, okay, that's just, that was just to do something for the Christmas episode and to give a little story to Maurice. No, there's a couple other instances. There's about 2 or 3 more instances where his son only appears one more time in the show. But there is a couple times where there's an episode also in the 3rd season where the Japanese have come to Sicily to celebrate the Aurora Borealis. And they're touring the city, and they all know about him being an astronaut and stuff like that. So they find him fascinating. And so he gives a tour to some of them of his house, and they see a picture of his Korean son up in the house. And immediately, they say, "Who's this?" And it's like, "This is my son." And then he turns to them seriously, like, "I know how you Japanese feel about Koreans. You think they're criminals. Well, this boy is not a criminal. He's my flesh and blood, and you treat him that way." So he's, Japanese were going to say anything bad about. It's a racist thing that he thinks that all Japanese thinks Koreans are bad. But the fact that he jumps in and defends his son when he doesn't need to shows a lot of growth in his thing. And then the last thing that just continues his growth is his son comes back like in the 4th or 5th season, and he is going to get married. And he wants to get his father's okay to get married and meet my soon-to-be wife, your daughter-in-law, so on and so forth, like that. But we find out that his soon-to-be daughter-in-law, her grandfather, great-grandfather, was the cruel dictator in Korea that was the one who caused that problems. And so he's got to juggle his wanting his son to be happy with the fact that his soon-to-be daughter-in-law is like the granddaughter of his worst enemy.
Right.
So he's got to juggle that. And in the end, he makes the right case. There are a bunch of people who try to persuade him that, no, you cannot allow this wedding to happen because this guy, her grandfather, was a brutal dictator beast.
Right.
And eventually he knows that his son would be happy with this woman and is able to forgive the past. And so so it's just, I like the idea that someone who starts off so racist and it's a throw off racism, it's where he doesn't really know, he doesn't realize he's being racist. He says these things, how he starts to grow as a good father, and that's why Maurice is number 10.
That's really cool. That's a cool journey what they wrote out for that character. I like that.
Oh,
yeah, I never watched Northern Exposure, but that's cool.
Oh.
Someday.
First 3 seasons. As I said, the 3rd season is the absolute best season you're ever going to see, and there are periodic episodes in 4 or 5. You can forget about 6. 6 is horrible. The 6th season is terrible. But we'll go on. But go to number 9.
All right, my number 9 is from a sitcom, and he is an old school dad. And he was actually on 2 sitcoms. So first he was on one, and then he moved on over to the second one. And his name is Marty Crane. And he is Frasier and Niles Crane's dad. So he was one of Cheers' bar, frequent, what's the word? Just always at a bar fly, I guess, always at the bar.
Yeah.
And that's how we got to know him. He's a retired police officer. And I guess when they did Frasier, Frasier, we all know, ends up getting divorced from Lilith and moves from Boston back to Seattle, and his dad's there. But yeah, I guess we'll know. No, so Marty was he ever on Cheers? Maybe I'm wrong.
No, he wasn't. What happened was.
Did he ever?
What happened was. No, what happened was they asked they asked Frasier about his dad in Cheers, and he said that his parents were dead. The funny thing is though, yeah, or something like that. But the funny thing is though, when Ted Danson came out as Sam Malone for an episode of Frasier, and Sam was a former baseball player, so of course, Marty is huge fans. Like, yeah, did my son ever tell you about me? And he's like, well, actually, he said you were dead and a scientist. And he was like, what? Why? And then Frasier's like, well, we just had a fight,
All right, so
I'm sorry, but go ahead.
He was only on one sitcom. He was on Frasier, and so
he's a good dad. He's a good dad, though. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's funny about him is he's just very down to earth. He's a nice guy. He loves beer and playing poker. And the ironic thing is, he ends up with these 2 sons who are very stuffy. They're more into opera and the fine wine and all the fine things in life. They're wasps and whatever. And just the fact that this guy could be their father, or this guy could produce these 2, professionals in the world. It's very funny. And what I really love about Marty and Frasier and Niles is the way that they grew throughout Frasier, and they really did by the end become really close. And, even though you couldn't really say I love you to anybody besides his dog Eddie, you could tell the love was there and all the bonding that happened. And so he's my number 9.
He's a very good pick, and I'm ashamed to say that I didn't put him on my list. Mine is actually more movie heavy, I guess, which is odd, but still, no, he's great because you can see that progression. I just remember seasons. It's almost this bitter resentment almost that the 2 of them have, that he's stuck being with his hoity, even though his son was trying to do the right thing, but they have nothing in common.
Right.
And once again, this is where the Christmas episode comes in again. The first Christmas episode they ever did, Frasier and Marty get into a fight, and Frasier ends up saying, you know what, I'll work Christmas Day at the radio station. So he works by himself, and he helps a lot of people, but everyone's telling stories about their dads and their family and stuff like that. And then eventually Marty calls in to the radio show, and they have a kind of a heart-to-heart conversation without revealing that that's his dad, that type of thing. He just treats him like a different caller, it's like a regular caller, but he knows it's his dad. And it starts showing something that, but then obviously as the years progressed, the 3 of them started bonding closer and getting a much better case. And then by the end of the season, by the end of the show, they were in a much better place than they were at the beginning. So that's actually a brilliant one. So awesome. And I love John Mahoney because he was born on June 20th, just like me. So he's a June 20th. And he's also a great character actor anyway. He's great in everything he does. So My number 9 is Dr. Walter Stratford from 10 Things I Hate About You. He's played by Larry Miller. And Larry Miller is one of these dumpy looking, balding type of guys. And in 10 Things I Hate About You, he plays, Dr. Stratford, who has 2 daughters. His wife has left them. So basically he's become a single father to these 2 daughters. And his oldest daughter, I don't remember their names right now. I know one is Kat, and I forget what the other one is. I think Kat is the older daughter, played by Julia Stiles. And she is your typical rebellious teenager. She's very feministic. She's very, doesn't need a man for anything, wants to do things for herself. She's tough. She's, she's rock'em sock'em, and she wants to get away from her family. She's a senior in high school, and she wants to go to Sarah Lawrence, which is on the East Coast. Now, 10 Things I Hate About You takes place in the outskirts of Seattle. Good segue, anyway, from Frasier to 10 Things I Hate About You. And her dad is, and Dr. Walter is one of those overprotective dads. After his wife left, he became so overprotective of his daughter, plus the fact that he's an OBGYN, and he has to deal with teenage pregnancies all the time. So he says, not my daughters. So he becomes very strict about them dating people. Now, Kat's okay because she doesn't really want to date anybody anyway. But the fact that she wants to go to the East Coast, thousands of miles away from him, where he's trying to get her to stay at University of Washington so he can keep an eye on her, that's where their conflict comes in handy. And then I forget what Larissa Olniak's character's name is, but the sister, his younger sister, she wants to be popular. She wants to date, and she wants to do all this stuff. And so, but she's also the youngest, and she's got daddy kind of wrapped around her finger a little bit, but he still doesn't know everything. So one of the funniest things is, he always tells them stories about, why he doesn't want them to go to parties. And he always uses the same anecdote about how he had a teenager come in who was like coked out of her mind, and screaming that she doesn't want to have kids, and screaming that she should have listened to her dad. And the funny thing was, they're like, no, she didn't say that. And he said she would have if she wasn't drugged. but he's just the end. So eventually he acquiesces and lets them go to a party. But one of the funniest things is, before he lets them go to a party, he has his youngest daughter try on what he calls the belly, which simulates a pregnant body. So he puts it on his youngest daughter's body, and she has to wear this and walk around the house for a few minutes. Says, you have to wear this so you realize before you kiss a boy, if you do anything with a boy, that this is what could happen. So he's like a totally overprotective guy. And what's great is, the reason why he's number 9 is because he's your typical movie dad. There's a bunch of them, and there's a bunch on my list I'll be talking about, but they're the ones that they seem like they're the tough dads, tough, as we talked about with Bernie Mac, the tough love dads, who try their hardest to be the wall that the kids are bashing against. But in the end, he drops some sort of pearl of wisdom or whatever, and shows that he truly, cares for his kids, and his overprotectiveness is to protect them, while at the same time it's to keep him from getting hurt because of what his wife did to his family. He's still trying to recover from that. And the best thing is he drops his little bon mot at the end is, and it's a spoiler warning if you haven't seen it, but basically Kat and him have been going at it about her going to Sarah Lawrence on the East Coast, and eventually he acquiesces and has sent away a check to let her go to Sarah Lawrence. And so he's getting ready to tell her that she's depressed because she just lost her boyfriend that she loves and stuff like that. And so he just basically says something along the lines of you've had me on the bench for years, meaning that, I can't, whatever I say, you don't even listen to me anymore because you never do what I tell you to do. And that's okay. And whereas, your younger sister, she lets me play a few innings, as it were. He used a baseball euphemism, but he says and then he goes on to say, I'm doing this to protect you. I don't want to lose you and all this stuff. And then he says, but I understand. And, I've got you to, I've sent the money to Sarah Lawrence, and she absolutely lights up and gives him the biggest hug. And she's never really hugged her dad the whole time. And he's a overprotective dad, but at least he's there for his kids, and is doing it. It might be a little obsessive, but he's doing it to protect them, because teenage pregnancy is not a joke, and it's not 16 and pregnant that you get a TV show on MTV. It's not fun. You need to be older to be pregnant. No, you don't need to be, but I mean, it's better because you'll be able to handle it better than if you're a teenager. And that's my rant about that. So my number 9 is Dr. Walter Stratford from 10 Things I Hate About You.
I like that. And I also like the fact that, like you said, he was overprotective, but he had very good reasoning because of how he was hurt by his wife, So it wasn't like he was just overprotective just to be like, oh, I've got daughters, I'm going to be tougher on them. Like, there was real reasoning to, his feelings and the way he acted toward them. I like that. I like that one a lot.
Thank you.
My number 8 is from another sitcom, and the sitcom is Family Matters. I don't know if you ever saw that, with good old Urkel. And it is the dad. His name is Carl Winslow. And he was played by Reginald Bell Johnson, who's funny because he's sort of like this very round, biggish, stocky man. And of course, he's a blue-collar, hardworking police officer, and he's married to Harriet. And so she's this very strong, vibrant, definitely runs the show type thing. They have the 3 kids, Eddie, Laura, and Judy. And, he's this very loving husband. He's strict. That all comes from being the police officer. But at the same time, he's sort of a goofball too. But he's a goofball in that, he's very well-meaning. He doesn't try to skirt on his responsibilities. It's a sort of different kind of goofball. But what's really cool about him is that there's this boy next door named Steve Urkel, who just sort of pops in whenever he feels like it, this nerdy, annoying guy. And it really, eggs him on and gets him so mad. But this is another case where, as the series progresses and goes on, Carl and Steve, create this really strong bond, and he almost becomes the father figure for Urkel that Urkel never had. And just the idea that, he cares for his own children, and, they run the gamut in terms of the problems that they experience, and he handles it best he can. Sometimes he's great, sometimes he makes his mistakes, but then he also takes on Steve, and it just sort of, I think Steve helps him to grow to become a better father to his own children. So it's this really nice back and forth between all these different characters and different age, and just shows the growth of this father, and so that's why he's on my list.
That's a good one too. I like Reginald Bell Johnson. I always have. And his role in that show was absolutely great. And this list, and once again, as I said, mine's more movie oriented, but he probably be on my probably top 15, probably a really good one. And just the whole family in general is just of a family and stuff like that, because some of these shows get a little over, get kind of a little really, would that really happen? Does that stuff? But no, this is a bit more down to earth, and
a little bit more
fact and the fact also that he does become a father figure to Urkel is very big also, because he doesn't need to, but he does because he feels that's the right thing he needs to do. So that's a good choice. My number 8 is actually, the funny is, I'm looking at my list. My next I mean, we're in a pattern right now where these next 3, starting with 9 down to 7, are all sort of these dads in movies that have little bombos at the end to help their kids. My number 8 is Jim Baker from 16 Candles, played by Paul Dooley. And for those who don't know, 16 Candles has Molly Ringwald. John Hughes wrote and directed it. Molly Ringwald just turned 16 years old. It's her birthday, but her whole family forgets because her older sister is getting married the next day. So they have all this, craziness going on with getting the preparations for the wedding and for getting the family in and make sure everything, because they paid for the wedding. I mean, they're the brides, they're the father of the bride, so they have to pay for the wedding. So they've got to deal with all this stuff. So they kind of ignore Sam, who's played by Molly Ringwald, and she goes on to have one of the absolute worst birthdays you could imagine. You know, the geeky boy tries to hit on her. She's in love with the most attractive guy in the world, and in high school, and he doesn't even know she exists, as far as she knows. And and then of course she's got to compete with her sister and her whole family being crazy, and then her whole family, who's insane, coming into town as well. So you've got all this stuff going on. But and so you think, okay, well, if he forgets his own daughter's birthday, why is he on the list? Granted, it's late in the evening, but he goes down and has in one of the best scenes in the whole movie, where Sam's had this totally awful day, and now she's sleeping on the sofa because her relatives have taken over her private room, and she feels like she's been made into an idiot by all the stuff that's happened, stuff like that. So she's kind of depressed. And so he comes down and sees that she's not sleeping, and he just wants to, apologize and say he did, finally remember her birthday, and that he's really sorry, and her mother remembered, and that he hopes everything's okay. And then as he's getting ready to leave, she still looks depressed. So you see your middle daughter depressed. You're like, okay, let me see what's wrong. So he sits down. This is about like 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night. The wedding's the next day, so he's already got plenty of stuff going on. But he takes some time to sit down and see her. Besides the fact that her birthday was missed, and she goes on to tell him about the boy and all this stuff, and he just, I can't even do it justice. You just have to watch it yourself. He just he does to her after she's unloading how horrible her day was, besides the fact that their birthday was forgotten, and he just makes her feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very small scene, but that scene alone is enough to put him at number 8 on my list. And then on top of that, which makes it even better, is that at the very end of the movie, when the wedding's already happened, and it had its own little problems. We're not going to get to it. You have to see this movie. If you haven't seen it, you have to see it. Yeah, you have to see it. But it goes in, and at the end, so he sees Sam with this gorgeous guy who drives a Porsche and everything like that, and she's like, "This is the guy I was telling you about." And he's like, gives her the thumbs up, and and just gives it just this great little moment between the two of them that, okay, it's all turning out okay for you, and go for it. I'm not even going to worry about you. You go have fun. We'll handle this. You go have your fun. And it's just a great two little moments. But just that scene at night when he's talking to his daughter, makes as I've told you before, I will watch that scene over and over again. And if my daughter has a situation like that, I will use all the lines he uses to make her, because they're true. They're really true. Now, before we get to your number 7, our friend John McGevna says, "Hey, Dylan and Gigi, contenders from the early days of TV, Robert Young and Father Knows Best. When he agreed to do that role, he insisted that his character, he felt there were too many of those on TV at the time." And that's a good point, John. That was the thing that Geri and I, have discussed before, is that there are too many clown dads out there, and that pisses me off to no end, as as I talked about. But hopefully, the dads we're talking about here, they sort of push aside the clown dads. But yeah, that's a good for Robert Young that he stood to his guns like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Your number 7.
All right, my number 7 is, funny enough, is very similar to my number 8, and I just realized that now when I'm looking down at my list, and that is Philip Banks, played by James Avery on The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. And the similarity, I guess, really stops and ends at the point where, okay, so Will Smith is Will he's the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and what happens is he gets into a little bit of trouble back home. He lives with his single mom and in West Philly. And he gets into some trouble, and she gets really scared and worried for him. So his Uncle Philip says he can come and live with us. Now, Uncle Philip's this happily married judge. He's his wife's Vivian. The 3 kids are Hillary, Carlton, and Ashley. And, when Will first gets there, he assumes, oh boy, these people are soft. They're extremely wealthy. They're in this mansion. He's a la-di-da judge. This is going to be cake. I'm going to be able to not take advantage, but this is going to be ridiculous. I'm this tough kid from Philly kind of thing. But what we come to find out about Uncle Phil is that, he grew up poor, and it was like on a farm, poor-ish in North Carolina, and had his struggles. And what was really cool is as you're learning more about him as the, episodes and series progresses, you come to find out that he, witnessed a lot of different events, particularly or pertaining to Black history. So then there were certain episodes that almost became educational in that they taught you, I think he was around for the Selma riots and all this other stuff. And basically the point was, and what he taught Will was, I had to work hard. I had to work my tail off to get to this point. You're only seeing, the fruits of my labor. And it really teaches Will this lesson, you can be tough, you can be hard, or at least start that way. But then, if you are consistent and keep at it, you can, then enjoy the fruits of your labor, so to say. And what was cool about him was he loved his family. He cared about him. He really did take Will under his wing. And, he expected his children to make something of themselves. It wasn't like, oh, here's money, go ahead, go, whatever, do whichever you want. He wanted them to succeed and work hard too in life. And I think that just makes him a very fantastic dad, because he's someone that, he didn't have to be present. He could have had tons of nannies, and I know he's fictional and all, but he could have had the nannies and gone out with his wife and said, whatever, the kids will do whatever they want. They're never in need because of my financial position. But it wasn't the case at all. And I think that was just really cool how they wrote his character that way.
Absolutely, and that's why it's underestimating him is a good thing. I mean, Will expects him to as you said, be a cakewalk. He's this rich, soft guy, and turns out he's tougher than I am.
Yeah.
And he shows it too. There are many times where he gets in, Will's face and doesn't take his stuff, and that is exactly what Will needed. To be honest,
Right.
He needed that type of strong father figure, and that was the perfect. His uncle was the perfect one to do it. And plus, I also love the fact that he didn't want to just give his kids money, because too many rich people do that. They say, here, you're rich. Here's your trust fund. Do whatever the hell you want to do. If you spend it all, we'll give you more. It doesn't give them and they become, once again, I hate to use the word, but they become assholes. They become assholes again.
Yeah,
and elitists, and they feel that that they deserve everything and that they're better than you. And he didn't want that to happen, because once again, that is the sign of a good dad, and he's excellent choice for the list as well. My number 7, to finish up my trilogy of movie dads who are fairly close to the same, is Mel Hurwitz from Clueless, played by Dan Hedaya.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one. I didn't think of him.
And the main reason why I have him on there is one line that he says, which is absolutely amazing, and I'll get to that in a second. But to those who don't know, the basic premise is Dan Hedaya's character, Mel Hurwitz, is this well-to-do lawyer. They live in California. I believe they don't really go into detail, but the way I gathered it is that his wife died. And his wife was his wife was like the love of his life, and she died. I think it was like a plastic surgery accident or something like that, but she dies. And so it was his true love. And then, so he's gone off and he's gotten married 2 or 3 or 4 other times. But it's never really stuck. But from his first wife, the true love of his life, he has a daughter, Cher, played by Alicia Silverstone. And Cher is your typical, not really brainless, but kind of bubbly, California-esque, loves to hang out with friends and wants to try to help people and stuff. But at the same time, she wants to live her life and buy clothes and hang out with the friends and do all kinds of fun stuff. And they're sassy and they're, and stuff like that. And she ends up having to deal with her former stepbrother, who's Paul Rudd. Now, this is where the line comes in, because once again, so after Mel's wife, who Cher's mother, died, which was the love of his life, whatever, he's journeyed his way through a couple wives here and there, and one of them was his stepson was Paul Rudd's character, and so he wasn't the father, but he was his stepdad at one time. And Paul Rudd's character is older; he's like college age. He's in his mid-20s or early 20s, rather, I should say. And he wants to be a lawyer also. So of course, Mel's going to take him under his wing, the ropes of being a lawyer, trying to convince him to be a business lawyer like he is. Whereas Paul wants to be sort of a environmental law lawyer, and he's trying to convince him that's not good for you. But this is where good dad, that and something else. But the thing that really got me, the reason why he's higher than Jim Baker and Walter Stratford, is because of this. Cher and Paul Rudd have this relationship early on where it's very antagonistic to each other, sort of like a real sibling thing is. But we find out that, Paul Rudd's still hanging around, even though, Mel has divorced his mom like years ago. And when Cher tells her dad that she's frustrated with Paul Rudd being around all the time, Dan, without missing a beat, pulls out this bomb and says, "You divorce wives, not children." And I think that is absolutely a brilliant statement, because even if it isn't your real child, even if you're not the dad of this child, you were his father, stepdad for a little while. And, even though you no longer are married to his mother, he's still a kid, and he's still a child, and he still needs guidance, and he still needs help. And so, you might not see him as much. And fortunately, he sees Paul Rudd a lot because Paul Rudd wants to be a lawyer. But, even if Paul Rudd wasn't a lawyer, I think Mel would make time to maybe take him to a ball game or somewhere just to hang out with them, just to stay in his, and I think that's such a great line, that you divorce, not children. And it's because you don't, children, you don't want to separate yourself, from any stepchildren you've had or stuff like that, even though you don't marry. You don't have to be around them all the time, but still hang out and see how they're doing and make sure that they're doing okay, because they are the next generation, and you were in their life for a big amount of time. So then once again, Cher has some moments of clarity here and there, and she decides to change her ways and become more of a pro-environmental type person. And then she has a lot of different things happen. And once again, her and her dad have another little one of these dad-daughter moments where he throws out some words of advice that are very smart and very interesting and very good, and it helps her get over whatever her problem is and moves on to her happy ending. And that's what's great. And Dan Hedaya is such a great actor, and he's such a great character actor, and he's one of these guys that you see him and you're like, I know him from somewhere, but I don't know where he is. He takes on a role. He's the epitome of a character actor. And going back to Cheers, he was Carla's husband, who appeared in a number of episodes before she married the hockey player, played by Jay Thomas. But it's kind of funny, and I've always loved Dan Hedaya. He's great in the movie Casper. He's great in Usual Suspects. He's just such a great, and he's great in this. He's fantastic in this, and he's such a loud, verbose, satirical, snarky type of dad. Because he's the lawyer, he has to be. But the fact that he states, you divorce wives, not children, that's why he's my number 7.
That's a good choice. I wish I would have thought of him, because he was a great dad, and that movie was great too. Okay. Well, my number 6 is my very first movie dad. And actually, he wasn't really officially a dad, because he was Mr. Mom. And that was Jack Butler, played by Michael Keaton. So it's the 80s. There was a huge recession in the 80s. People were losing their jobs. And the movie starts with Jack Butler losing his job. Him and his friends lose their job from the Ford Motor Company. His wife, she had gone to school back when, and she had gotten this degree in advertising. And she's like, you know what? She's like, you stay home, and I'm going to take my shot. I'm going to go back into the workforce and see what I can do. So he's like, all right, I'll be Mr. Mom. They have these 3 kids, Alex, Kenny, and Megan. And he's like, how hard can this be, kind of thing. The infamous, how hard can this be? Well, it's hard. And he is extremely horrible at it. Just horrible. he realizes he can't juggle the house cleaning with the errands and the kids' schedule. And then, what do these moms do all day when they're not cleaning? They're watching soap operas. So at first he's like, soap operas. But then as the movie progresses, he does get into the soap operas, which is very funny. And he's got to deal with these other stay-at-home moms, particularly one of the neighbors who actually starts to crush on him. So he's sitting there thinking, wow, I used to be this working dad. Now I've become this Mr. Mom figure. And, and at the same time, he also has to deal with the fact that his wife, it turns out she's very good at her job. And so she is climbing this corporate ladder. He's starting to feel threatened by this because she's got, I think it's her boss that's like a little bit flirty with her. It's been a little bit since I watched the movie. And, this causes a strife in their relationship. But no matter what, the bottom line is he's a dad or Mr. Mom or, whoever. He is the parent and he wants to make this work and he's going to do what he has to do. And it's just really cool and very unconventional for that time. There weren't so many stay-at-home dads then. There was probably some here and there, but you just didn't hear of it. And it just sort of like that movie sort of like broke that mold that, a woman can work, she could be successful, and a man can stay at home and he could do all that stuff too. So that was pretty cool. So I needed to put that on the list.
1983. And at that time, stay-at-home moms were not the same. I mean, working mothers were just starting to really become a force in there, and stay-at-home dads were starting to become a force. I'm going to talk about this later because it's higher up on my list. So.
Okay, cool. All right.
So it's the first one that we agree on. And there are times, for those who haven't seen our show, there are times where Geri and I are almost of the same brain sometimes.
Right.
And other times, we're off kilter, but that's okay. So it's good to have that. But there's a lot I want to talk about because it is such a great movie. And it's such a great cast. And it was written by John Hughes, the guy who did 16 Candles. He didn't direct it, but he wrote it, which was great. So my number 6 is one of your favorite movies, one of my favorite movies. Had to bring him up. Edward Bloom from Big Fish.
Ah, yes.
Because I can never stop talking about Big Fish, because Big Fish is one of my absolute favorite movies of all time.
And I didn't put that on my list. What happened to me?
Well, no, see, here's the thing. But the thing is, though, it is, but it isn't, because Edward Bloom he's a okay dad, but it's just the fact that, just the fact that it's such a great story, and you see the story from his perspective. You see him, he's played by two different actors. He's played by Ewan McGregor when he's younger and by Albert Finney when he's older. And both do phenomenal job with the role. It's I think one of Tim Burton's most underrated films. It is an absolute, no one ever talks about it. It is an absolute gem of a film. It's not your typical Tim Burton. It's got its Tim Burton-esque qualities to it, but it's not really your typical Tim Burton style film. And to be honest, it's the last good film that he made before this recent lull he's had. I think he's going to get out of that with the adaptation of a Miss Peregrine's School for Special Kids, or whatever that is, that's coming out next year. I think he'll get out of his funk with that. And I didn't see Big Eyes. I think Big Eyes is starting to show him getting back to that sort of more of a smaller story type of thing. And that's what Big Fish is. Big Fish is a smaller story, though you believe that it's a bigger story, because Edward Bloom is a bigger than life character. And basically it is a great film for fathers and sons, because the framing of the story has Edward Bloom's son is getting married, and at their engagement party, Edward Bloom starts talking about himself. Not about his son so much, but about himself, because Edward Bloom has lived this crazy life and he likes to tell these tall tales about his life. Now, his son has heard these stories a million times. He's heard them over and over again. And when he was younger, they were awesome. They were cool. His dad was so cool. All kinds of really cool stuff. But now he's older. He's like, seriously? This is my time, not yours, and you made it about you and not me. And so luckily his wife is French, so they go over to France, and so he doesn't have to interact with his dad so much. But, a few years down the line, his wife is now pregnant, so he's on the cusp of becoming a dad. And then he gets a phone call from his mom. You need to come back home. Your dad's not doing too well. So he comes back home, and Edward Bloom is now in his final death throes, as it were. He's got cancer or some sort of, bad disease, but he's bedridden and he's weak and he's not your typical, but he's still got that effervescent self that he is. And that's the framing of the story. And so basically what happens is his son's wife hasn't really heard a lot of the stories as Edward has told them. She's probably heard them from her husband, but never from Edward himself. So Edward starts telling these stories, and that's when we flash back to see how Edward became the guy he is. Now, for the framing part alone, it's the sequence between the dad and his son, and how the two of them, who have been butting heads for a long time, finally have to come together, and his son has to forgive the dad, and the dad has to realize that there's more to life than just what happened to him. Right. There's his family. But don't get me wrong, Edward Bloom he's a very fun guy. He's hilarious. He's effervescent. He's so great. Everyone loves him. He's devoted to his wife, played by Jessica Lange, who was amazing in the movie. Mm-hmm. And played by not Amy Adams, but Amy something, I think, in when they were younger. But and then and meanwhile, Edward's son is trying to learn more about his dad, and he knows all the tall tales, but at the same time, he knows there's real stories underneath those. And a good example is when he's talking to his dad's doctor, who was the doctor that gave birth to the doctor that gave birth to Edward's son and stuff like that. He said that there's story going around that Edward was not at the birth of his sons. Was not at his wife's side when his son was born, because he was battling a giant catfish who had stolen his wedding ring. And that was a story that Edward always told. But the doctor, played by Robert Guillaume, says, "You ever hear the story about, why your father wasn't there when you were born?" And he's like, "Yeah, I heard it all the time about the big fish." And Robert Guillaume says, "Not that one, the other one." And that got his son's interest. He's like, "No, tell me." Turned out, and it was a boring story. Edward was a traveling salesman, and he was like in Omaha. Yeah. So he couldn't make it back in time to see the birth of his son. And that's the story. And let's face it, that's boring. Yeah. What's more exciting? My dad was a traveling salesman, and that's why he wasn't there for my birth, or he was battling a giant catfish who had eaten his ring. I would go with that story, but I can understand his son's, anger, because it's not real. You were on the road, and you've been telling everybody that you're this great guy. You would have been there, but you were fighting this fish. And so I can see where he's pissed. Right. But eventually he starts digging more into his father's life, and he starts learning more about his father, and learns the stories behind the stories, and learns that some of the stories that he told are actually true. Right. And so, and that's good. But the main reason he's on this list is it is a film that is fathers and sons. And then at the end, go ahead, go do what you got to do, Jerry. I'll go. Jerry has to depart for a few minutes. But at the very end, the story is Edward is finally about to die. And his son is the only one with him. He's at his bedside, and they've come to an understanding. They've sort of, made up, and everything's good. And so just in time for his dad to die. And his dad had told a story early on that when he was a kid, there was a witch that lived in his town, and he was able to see how he was going to die. And so his dad on his deathbed asked his son, "Tell me how I'm going to die." And his son was like, "Well, you never told me the story, Dad. I don't know the story." And the dad was like, "Tell the story." So then his son now has to make up this story that's more interesting than the fact that you died of cancer. Right. So he makes up this outrageous story that is on par with the stories that Edward Bloom told. And it is that final moment of bonding between the two of them, and probably one of the best scenes in the whole movie that cements his place as number 6.
I agree. Because I know the story, but they're on. That's why I was going to shut the door. I apologize for that.
No, it's okay. Don't worry about it. It's fine. It's cool.
Yeah, they won't make noise. But no, yeah, I do. I mean, yeah, that story is great. Obviously, you're not going to say what it is for people who haven't seen the movie, but yeah, that's good. All right, well, go ahead.
Number 5.
Okay, well, my number 5 is probably not someone you'd ever expect to be on any of my lists ever. And he was from a movie. He was played by Nick Cage, and he was in the movie Kick-Ass. And his character's name is Damon McReady. Now, you know, Kick-Ass is about all these like vigilante teens who want to, you know, fight crime or whatever. So this is just like one piece of this bigger story. So I'm only honing in on this character. So, you know, he's this famous NYPD officer, and his best friend, also his partner, is Marcus Williams. Well, his nemesis is this drug crime lord named Frank D'Amico. I had to write that down because I couldn't remember. And basically, D'Amico frames Damon, and he ends up going to jail. And he gets 5 years. Well, his wife at the time is pregnant, and she gets so depressed that she kills herself. But they were able to get the baby girl out of her, and they named her Mindy. So Marcus decides, okay, I'm going to take care of Mindy while you're in jail. So the 5 years goes by. Mindy doesn't know about him. He comes back into the picture. When he gets out, he decides he's going to teach about weaponry, how to fight all different types of fights, like martial arts, and, you know, all the different fighting, what's the word? You know, the types that there are out there. Styles, yeah, whatever. I like that on
Yeah, I know what you meant. Yeah.
And also how to take a bullet to the chest when you're wearing a bulletproof vest. So you think, oh, Geri, why do you have him on this list here? Because he teaches his daughter how to be this crazy violent person. Well, he does it so that then they can become a crime-fighting duo. And he is Big Daddy, and she is Hit Girl. And the goal is to bring down Frank D'Amico. And yeah, the reason why I put him on the list is because, you know, he loves his daughter. And, you know, they did have a rocky start in terms of a relationship because of what had happened to him. But the fact that his whole world and his whole life was about protecting her and showing her what to do. And, you know, his only goal is he wants to keep her safe. And if he can get rid of him, that would be a big piece to this puzzle of keeping her safe. And just the love that it takes, you know, and the perseverance and all that to just teach this little girl to grow up to be this tough chick and be able to take care of herself. I just think that that's a really special bond that the two of them had, and it shows in the movie. So I wanted to put them on my list for that.
Well, no, it's a good spot because let's face it, that's the epitome of what you want to be as a father and as a mother.
Yeah.
You want to make sure that your kids are as protected and as safe as they can be, as safe as you can make them to be. Yes, there are things that are out of your control you can't handle, but if you give them the tools, then they'll be okay. Yeah, he might have gone over the edge a little bit with his training, but at the same time, he was living in a different type of area. I mean, he was a police officer, you know, and you're going to make enemies, and you're going to have to deal with crime people, and they're going to want to get revenge for people you put behind bars. So you might have to be a little bit more aggressive in the training. Whereas, you know, with me, I certainly won't be teaching Noelle how to use guns or swords or knives because I honestly I don't have any enemies, you know, really that are of the violent criminal type. I've got plenty of other ones elsewhere, but none that are the violent criminal type that are coming after my family. So, you know, I'll just keep her, you know, teach her the general basics of, you know, don't talk to strangers, you know, use your head, stuff like that, you know. But yeah, no, it's not a bad choice. It really isn't. It makes a lot of sense because it is the epitome of what a dad does. Your whole goal as a parent is to make sure your kids are protected, and he did it. Granted, a little slightly off kilter, but still, his reasoning for it makes a lot of sense considering the line of work he's in and his and his obsessions and stuff like that. So it's a good one. My number 5 is the first of 2 times that this actor is going to appear on my list. I sort of teased it out a little bit on Twitter this week, and you might be able to figure out what the other one is, or you might not, who knows. But my number 5 is George Banks from Follow the Bride 1 and 2, played by Steve Martin. I love Steve Martin. He's one of my favorite actors. He can play the goofy comic guy. He can also play the really funny comedic dad who's very supportive also. And he sort of melds that together in George Banks' character. He is the epitome of the goofy, overbearing dad. But his whole reason for being is to make sure that his family has everything that they want, but he tries to do it as cheaply as he can. But he's not a cheapskate. He's well off. He owns his own sneaker company. His wife is fairly well off as well. And he's got two daughters. He's got two kids, daughter and son. And the daughter is very smart, and she's gone off to Paris or whatever to study for a while. And in Follow the Bride, she's coming back and has an announcement, and she is getting engaged to a guy that they've never met before. And this sort of freaks him out a little bit because it's his daughter, and you know how dads and daughters, that well, you might not know because you don't have any daughters, but dads and daughters. You would take your daughter to a dad. Yes, so obviously, yes, you would. I'm sorry. Yes, I apologize. Yes, that's right. I'm thinking, I'm way out in left field, and now Jerry's become one of my enemies now. So. But so now, she's still young. She's 21, 22 years old, and she's engaged to get married. And the minute he meets her fiance, who is coming to have dinner with them, he dislikes him immediately. And there's no reason to, because he's a good guy. He's played by George Newbern, and he's a good guy. And he loves his daughter. He loves his daughter. He loves Steve Martin's daughter, and she loves him, and they're really cute together. But he is the overbearing, protective Dr. Walter Stratford type dad, who's like, oh, I'm no longer the man in my little girl's life. He's got another guy, and I don't like him because he's taking my place. So he tries to come up with all these ways to somehow break them up. And that's maybe partially where he decides to go cheap when it comes to the wedding, because he's got to come up with the idea for the wedding. Plus, he also has to compete with the fact that his soon-to-be in-laws are very wealthy. And they're also very ecstatic. They love their son. They love Steve Martin's daughter. They just they're so joyful and so happy and so blah.
The father, and great.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. The father's tearing up. He's like, oh, I'm so happy. And Steve Martin's looking at him like, really?
Yeah.
Honestly? And what's great is Steve Martin's wife is played by Diane Keaton. The two of them have amazing chemistry together. And she is his, is the one that tries to bring him down to reality. Is like, look, you need to get over this, okay? Your daughter loves this guy. He's a good guy. He's a good kid. He's not some slime ball off the street, who's not well off and is and he's smart and he's making his own money. He's not going to take his parents' money. He's a smart guy. He's making his own money. He's got a business and he travels a lot. And so it spirals into that. It's like he's still trying to figure out a way to break up his daughter's engagement, but at the same time, he's trying to plan this wedding. And he's trying to do it as cheaply as possible. But eventually, he discovers, what? This is my daughter's big day. And after he has sort of a mental breakdown a little bit, he allows Diane Keaton. Yeah, he allows Diane Keaton and his daughter, Kimberly Williams, to plan the wedding, and they get Martin Short's character. I forget his name.
Was it Hans?
Hans. Yeah, Hans. Yeah, it was Hans, I think. Gets him, who's this flamboyant designer who comes up with all these crazy expensive ideas. Martin Short is absolutely phenomenal in the role. And I love B.D. Wong as his assistant, even though he doesn't say much. B.D. Wong is, and I'm just going to go off the tangent here. B.D. Wong is such an underrated actor. I saw Jurassic World today, and he's in that. He's the only guy who was also in Jurassic Park. He was in Jurassic Park, and now he's the only one who's in Jurassic World. He plays one of the scientists that creates the dinosaurs. And in this movie, Jurassic World, B.D. Wong, his character becomes 100% different than the one in Jurassic Park, and it seems like a progression, and that's to B.D. Wong's credit. So B.D. Wong plays in Follow the Bride 1 and 2, plays kind of the gay, cheerful, oh, I'm so excited, type of, but he's assistant to Martin Short's Hans, and it is phenomenal, the two of them working together. So eventually, Steve Martin realized, okay, this is my daughter's big day. We got to make it perfect. So now he starts getting under that. It's like, okay, we got to make this perfect. Everything's got to be great. So he is able to move his overbearingness to making sure everything goes off without a hitch. But then his daughter comes, says the wedding might be off because her and her boyfriend had a huge fight and she's thinking of maybe calling off the engagement. And she tells him the reason why. And Steve Martin just looks at her and is saying to himself, "Are you insane? You're arguing over a blender."
Yeah, it was jitters.
and yeah, it is. It's jitters. And this is a time where up to this point, he's been trying to break up this engagement. And this is the perfect time because she says, "What do you think, Dad? What do you think I should do?" And Steve Martin just thinks for a second and he says, "You are insane. This guy is great for you. He says, you got to listen to him. He's right. You're wrong." He's trying to explain that to, and then of course he shows up and apologizes and they make up and all is good. But he had his moment. He could have said, "Yeah, he's a loser, dump him." And she would have done it too. But he realized that this guy's not so bad. She loves him. He loves her. This is a simple fight. Jitters. And maybe he flashed back to the way things were with him and Diane Keaton when they first started going out. Similar things might have happened. So he's had the chance and he said, "No, you're wrong. He's right." And that was right there. That's the epitome of being a good dad also, because he's like, his daughter's happiness comes first. He could have, as I said, "You know what, over and done with. I could be the man in her life again." But no, this guy's perfect for her. And I'm beginning to accept him. I like him. And then, of course, the wedding. The wedding has its issues, but Steve Martin is able to control it, and it's just generally a really nice thing. And then the second one, his dadness increases to show how great of a dad he is when he goes through a midlife crisis. Once he discovers that his daughter's now pregnant and he's going to be a grandfather, and he feels, "I'm too young to be a grandfather. This can't be the case." So he goes through a midlife crisis. He dyes his hair blonde. He buys a awesome car and wants to sell his old house and buy a condo by the beach. And, he wants to, get busy with his wife again. And they have a little nice encounter in the kitchen. And his wife ends up pregnant also at the same time that his daughter is pregnant, and they're both due around the same time. So now he's got two pregnant women in his family. And so now he's got to control both, because it turns out that his son-in-law has to travel for work. And he has to, it's an important job, and it's a lot of money. He's got to do it. So she ends up moving back in with them. So now he has to deal with two pregnant women, and he does everything in his power to make his daughter and his wife as comfortable, which includes him not sleeping at all for like days.
Air conditioning in the house.
Air conditioning in the house. So and stuff like, and just and general stuff, which once again shows the pure dadness that he has, where he has this moment in the beginning where he's sort of like, I don't know what I'm going to do. We can't do it this way. But then he has this moment of epiphany, and then he becomes super dad and super husband and helps. And then, of course, everything goes absolutely crazy when, even though his wife isn't due for a couple of weeks, she starts having contractions. His daughter's having contractions at the same time. So now he's got to run back and forth between the two of them to make them both comfortable. And he's able to get Hans back in, Martin Short back in to help him out. And that's a great scene between the two of them. And it's just one of the best scenes in the whole film, which just shows his pure dadness. Is both of his family is now, they're getting the babies delivered, and he's out in the hallway by himself. There's complications that could happen with his wife's pregnancy, and then there's his daughter's pregnancy, but they don't want him in there. And he's just standing in the empty hallway in front of the two rooms with the doors closed, just waiting to hear good news, bad news, things could happen. And just the fact that, he spent all this time, and the fact that he could lose one or both or whatever, is frightening to him. And then luckily everything works out good. He has a grandson, and he has a brand new daughter. So he can start over again, even though now he feels like he's lost his daughter again, because now she's a mom, and now she's moving to Boston, which is even further away from California. But now he's got a new daughter. And so he can be Follow the Bride again for another 20 plus years till she gets married. And it's just great. I mean, there's all kinds of little moments, when he plays basketball with his daughter, and just pure dadness. And Steve Martin starts off as the crazy, overbearing dad, but eventually he shows that despite that aspect of him, he's actually a solid father. And that's why he's on my list at number 5.
Well, he's on my list too, but much, much, much higher. But yes, definitely George Banks. Yeah. Okay, so my number 4 is probably the opposite end of the spectrum in terms of my kick-ass daddy. And he was a real life person, but I am speaking solely from the TV show. And this is Charles Ingalls from Little House on the Prairie. So grain of salt, he was a real person because Laura Ingalls, there was a real person, but I am speaking solely of the TV character, Charles Ingalls. He was played by Michael Landon, who was great in everything that he did. And on the show, he's married to Caroline, and they have 5 children, Mary, Laura, Carrie, little Charles, who ends up dying. And I think they addressed that in one of the episodes, and Grace. And then later on, they end up adopting Albert, and siblings who lost their parents, James and Cassandra Cooper. And funny enough, James Cooper was played by Jason Bateman, which I totally forgot. He was the little Jason Bateman kid. But he's just this hardworking frontiersman. He's honest. He's loving. The family goes through some good times. They go through some very bad times. But no matter what, he does what he can to make the best of it for everyone involved. He's a religious man. He expects his kids to go to church, and he expects them to go to school and get an education. He's fair and just very well regarded in the community, and a very good problem solver. He was just a really good person, good guy, and having him on the list is sort of a no-brainer. So, Charles Ingalls.
It is, and I don't have him on the list, but it's good though. No, it is an appropriate one. It is a good choice. And he was based on a real person, but I think some of the stories were created for his character might not have actually happened in real life. So you could technically say he could fit the pop culture mold that we had. And Michael Landon that's what everybody looked at. I mean, sure, he did Highway to Heaven and all that stuff, but the one character that they always think of is, his character in Little House on the Prairie, because it's such an iconic character. And it is. And once again, it's the epitome of what a parent is. It's what a parent does. He protects his kids. He helps other people in need. He's problem solver and stuff like that. Now, before I get into my list, you just made me think of something. I didn't put him on my list, but and I can't remember what his name is right now, but the dad in To Kill a Mockingbird is a great dad, and I totally forgot about him. And I should have put him on the list, but I didn't. But once again, that fits with a similar, he does the right thing for his family. He's a family guy. He's helpful. He's smart, and everything he does to help other people, and that's what a good parent does, especially watching out after his family. My number 4 is a cartoon dad, but it's not who you think it is. It is Gru from Despicable Me and Despicable Me 2.
That's great. Yes, that makes sense. Yeah.
And this is one we were talking before the show. This is the one before your show. This is the one that my daughter wanted to see Despicable Me last weekend, and I was still trying to struggle for a 10th person for the list. And I saw that. I was like, you know what? He really is a good dad. And here's why. Along the similar lines of Maurice Minifield, who starts off as a racist type of guy who eventually changes when he discovers he has kids, Gru is a evil mastermind. He likes, his whole reason for being is to take over the world, steal stuff, whatever. And he has this plot that he wants to steal the moon because there's younger villains that are becoming more popular and are getting the money that he needs, and he started getting swept under the rug because he's an older guy who's been around for a while. So he needs to make a giant splash, so he comes up with an idea to steal the moon. In order to steal the moon, he needs a shrinking ray that has been stolen by his younger a younger villain who has decided that he wants to steal the moon now too, and steals Gru's idea. So Gru has to figure out a way to get the shrink ray back, because that's the whole reason. That's how he's going to steal the moon. And so he tries to go head on, but the guy's house is totally fortified and he cannot get in by himself. So he's sitting there and he's trying to think of what to do. And he's just watching the house and he sees three young girls who go up and they're selling like Girl Scout cookies. It's not Girl Scout cookies, but it's similar. It's something similar like that. And of course, this guy's like, oh yeah, I love cookies. So he lets them in and he buys all these cookies from them and he leaves. So I was like, discovers that they're orphans. They live in a orphanage, which is they're not being treated very well. And part of their job living in the orphanage, they have to sell these cookies. It helps give money to this orphanage. So Gru says, I can come up with an idea that I can infiltrate the house using them as a distraction. So he ends up going and adopts them just for the strict reason to use them to put the cookies in the house and get inside the house so he can steal the shrink ray. So his plan goes off without a hitch. He grabs the shrink ray and now he's got to figure out a way to get rid of the girl. So he's trying to figure out a way and he doesn't know what to do. And then he sees it's like a amusement park and they want to go and he's like, oh, okay. And then he says, I can leave them there. I'll just let them go on one of the rides and I'll leave them and my problem will be solved. So he does that. He's about ready to leave, but then he puts them on a ride and he says, no, they got to go on with a grown-up. So like, oh, fine. So then he goes on the ride with them. And from that point on, he has fun and they get him to do all stuff. So eventually he begins to have a lot of fun with the girls and ends up bringing them back to his house and begins to fall for them, and treat them like daughters, and it makes him happy that he has these three girls, and they're all young. They're young. And it's something that he feels that he needed, and that maybe it's not so important to be this criminal because he's just fallen for these girls. But due to some circumstances, that takes away from his plan to steal the moon, and his sidekick says, you know what, you need to refocus because you're not focused. You're focused too much on the daughters. We need to make you the greatest criminal again. So you need to steal the moon. So he's able to convince the orphanage to take the daughters back. This is the sidekick. Gru doesn't want to, but he does it because he realized he probably has to because he's got a way. And so he feels bad about what he did, but he still wants to try to become the baddest bad guy. And he's able to shrink the moon, but what happens is that his opponent, whose name I can't think of right now, he discovers that Gru has a weak link at these girls. So he kidnaps the girls and he says, I'll trade you the girls for the moon. And he reneges on that. So now Gru has to save the girls. And now he realizes how much he loves the girls and risks his life to save them. And so he does. And all's well that ends well. And then the second one comes along and it shows more and more how much he's changed. He's now a good guy. He's no longer a bad guy. It's his youngest daughter's birthday, and the princess fairy that he has called to rent for the day doesn't show. So to show how much he loves his kids, he dresses up as a fairy princess and does a little thing so that she will have this fairy princess. So that's the epitome of a good dad right there. And granted, the second one is more about him falling in love with a woman. But you do have a subplot with his oldest daughter is starting to find boys. Yeah. And of course, Gru becomes the absolute overbearing father, like all the other fathers on here, and tries to say, no, you can't date yet. You're too young, and tries to break them up. And it's such a great sequence where they're dancing, where his oldest daughter and the boy she likes are dancing, and Gru is watching them, and he sneaks over. It's like there's a lot of flashing lights like that. So in between the strobes and the flashing lights, you see Gru coming over, and then he does stuff to the boy, like he kicks him or punches him or throws him or whatever. But the boy comes back and like hits Gru and stuff. It's really funny, but just goes to show, how much he has fallen for his daughters and how good of a father he's become. So once again, it goes to show you that someone who's been an evil villain, you get three girls in your life that you use for one of your evil plans, but you fall in love with her, and there you go.
That's cute. That's a really good one. I'm glad that one's on your list. Okay. My number 3 is pretty obvious for me. Everybody knows who my number 3 is now. And he's played by Chevy Chase multiple times. And that is good old Clark Griswold. I think it's a Mother's Day. Did I have Ellen on the list? I think I may have.
Yeah, I think you did.
So
Yes,
was the woman behind the man. Well, I thought about it, and like, yeah, he's goofy and he makes mistakes and he's not perfect. But you know what? He always, always, always means well. And his goal is to have a happy family life, happy children, happy wife, and to create memories for them. Memories that then when they grow up, they can say, you know, my dad did this, my dad did that for me. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that clicking. He's chewing on his little toy.
Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, Clark, you know, throughout all the movies you see him, there's always like a problem in each movie, and he always seems to mess it up. He always gets it wrong. But it always works out in the end because he does have the love and the support of his family. So not only is it great that, you know, he's this loving dad and loving husband, but, you know, even though he is this doofball, they love him equally back. And I think that's what just makes the movie so great, except for Vegas Vacation. But yeah, I mean, you know, really great story. They're a really great family. They're a dysfunctional family, but they make it work. And so Clark is my number 3.
And that's good because that's the whole reason he does all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Is for his family. He wants to go to Wally World because he did that when he was younger, and he wants his family to experience that because it was such a great time. Well, he remembers the great times.
Right.
And it was a good time for him. And then he wants to have his family have a wonderful European vacation. So, once again, and then he wants to have a good old-fashioned Griswold family Christmas, as he likes to say.
Yeah.
That's the key. Griswold family Christmas. Not a Clark Griswold Christmas, a Griswold family Christmas. Now, he wants everything to be, as you said, perfect, make memories. That's exactly what he wants. And that's why, yes, he belongs on the list. Once again, he's not on my list, but he totally deserves to be because he actually is a good dad in the end. Yeah, he does make some mistakes, but who doesn't, you know? All dads make mistakes. But everything is done because he wants his family to be happy, and that is, once again, the epitome of a good dad. And how about, let me just real quick, have you seen the trailers for the new Vacation coming out this summer?
Yes, I have. And I'm sort of on the fence because I feel like the jokes are, well, the ones that they show in the trailer seemed forced and sort of been there, done that, maybe a little obvious.
Right.
So I don't know what would have made it great. Maybe it will be great. I don't know, but I have a feeling that what you see in the trailer is probably the funniest of what you're going to get throughout the whole movie. You know, sometimes when they just don't have much to pick from, so they put it on the trailer. I'm afraid it's going to be one of those. So I'm not sure. I'm on the fence, I have to say. Yeah,
well, at least you're gonna get appearance from Clark and Ellen.
Yeah,
so, and that'll be good. And I also like the fact that they're not remaking Vacation.
Right.
The next logical step. Yes, Rusty is now old enough to have a family, and now he's going to make the same mistakes that Clark did because Clark made the same mistakes that his dad made because of all. But at the same time, he's doing it because he wants his family to be happy. So we'll see. It might be interesting. It might be interesting on that end. My number 3 is the second Steve Martin on the list.
Yeah.
I picked this one, though, for number 3 higher than Follow the Bride because it's more of a different take for Steve Martin. I've mentioned this movie before to you, and it's an underrated film, and I think more people need to see it. It's A Simple Twist of Fate. He plays Michael McCann. It's a movie that Steve Martin wrote that is based on the old novel Silas Marner. And the basic premise of this movie, and it's more dramatic. Yeah, there are some comedic bits in it, but the film in general is dramatic, and it's a different take for Steve Martin, but Steve Martin absolutely kills it in this movie. He plays a high school music teacher who discovers that his wife got pregnant from another man. And that destroys his life, because he thought up to that moment that he was the dad and he was all excited. You know, my first kid, you know, this is going to be great. You know, it shows our love for love for my wife, love for you guys, like that. And then, oh no, wait, my wife had an affair and she got pregnant and it's not mine. And it destroys his life like that. And so he's like, you know what? I can't take this anymore. So he quits his job as a high school music teacher and he goes off and lives on the property of a political guy and he makes furniture and does stuff, but he lives by himself. And he, when he gets paid, he goes into, and he moves from, I guess it's like the Midwest to like Virginia, the wilds of Virginia. So he lives far away, and it's a small town, and he takes his wages that he gets from selling this furniture and being a caretaker for this politician's lands and stuff like that. And he goes into the small town where he's befriended Catherine O'Hara, who played the mom in the Home Alone movies. She's a shopkeeper who is trying to get him to open up, but he's totally closed himself off. He's a hermity type of character who doesn't talk very much, very low monotone, doesn't have any life, and all he does is he comes in on payday and he buys gold coins, because Catherine O'Hara's store is one of these stores that's free for all. It's got everything in there. So he buys gold coins, and he keeps the gold coins. He doesn't spend them, whatever. He hoards them because, as he says in the film, gold never lets you down, because you can tell he's still beaten down by the fact that he was betrayed by his wife. But then we discover that the politician, when he was up and coming politician, before he became a politician, had an affair with a drug addicted woman in town, and she got pregnant. But he needs to be a politician, and that's something you're not going to want to do. So he covers it up. He gets his brother to cover it up. He gives him money. The brother goes and delivers the money to the woman who's still addicted to drugs but still has this little girl. And this politician then meets this woman and is going to fall in love. They're going to get married. He's going to start his own family, and it's a political family, and he's running for president or Senate. I think it's Senate. I think he's running for a Senate seat. He wins the Senate seat, so now he's a powerful guy. And so the problem is his wife can't get pregnant. So he tries, but his wife can't get pregnant. So you fast forward. Before all that happens, though, there's a Christmas party, and Steve Martin's character is he's sleeping in his house, and he's sort of hungover because he's drunk, and the politician's brother stumbles upon the house, breaks in, and steals all of Steve Martin's gold coins, and then runs off. And we never see him again until the end of the film. And so now Steve Martin's life is totally ruined now, because all of his gold is gone, and he's got to start over fresh. And so he's been betrayed a second time. So now he's totally messed up. But then when this politician's having this party, he sort of, and then his brother has disappeared, who was the liaison for the money. She needs the money. And so she decides she's going to drive to this politician's house and say, here's your daughter, give me my money, and ruin his political career like that. But it's a cold, snowy, like Christmas thing, and she is high on drugs, and she ends up freezing to death before she can make it to the house. But she is outside of Steve Martin's cabin, and she lets the daughter go to the cabin, which is nice and warm, and the daughter comes in, and Steve Martin finds her and ends up falling for her, and decides that he wants to maybe adopt her. Maybe he needs something like that to help. So first thing he does is he takes the daughter up to the politician's party and says, "There's a dead woman in my yard, and this little girl came into my house. What are we going to do?" And the politician knows that this is his daughter, but he doesn't want to say anything because it would ruin his political career. So he says, "Why don't you take care of her?" And so, and that way he can keep an eye on his child or whatever, but not ruin his political career. And so Steve Martin goes and tries to adopt the daughter, and it looks like it's going to not happen because he doesn't have any assets. He works, he doesn't make a lot of money. He lives in a cabin, but because this politician, it's his daughter, and he knows that his daughter will be in good hands, he's able to grease some palms and is able to allow him to adopt the daughter. And this brings Steve Martin out of his shell, and he becomes more of a open person, becomes more the Steve Martin that we're used to.
Right.
And he becomes more open and stuff like that. So then, as I mentioned before, I got a little ahead of myself. So now the politician got married to this woman, and she can't have a baby now. And so this is like 10 years later. So the little girl has grown up at Steve Martin's cabin, believing Steve Martin is her father. And he's been teaching her different unorthodox things, and teaching her about books and music and stuff like that, because he doesn't have like a TV, and she reads books, and she's really, really, really smart. and the politician still knows it's his daughter, so he still keeps an eye on her and talks to her, and she just thinks of him as some nice guy that her dad works for. Doesn't know that's her real dad. So 10 years pass and things are going good, and Steve Martin's happy-go-lucky and he loves his daughter. And then, as I said, the politician's wife can't have kids. So the politician's wife knows about the daughter also, and she says, "You got a daughter right there. Why don't you adopt her back? It'll make it look good. Family man, wants to make her daughter's life better and stuff like that. It'll help maybe cement the place for you to maybe make a run for the presidency." And he's like, "That's an interesting idea." And then, of course, he tries to get his daughter back. And what happens then is a court battle between the rich politician and the poor Steve Martin, who was the dad when he wasn't. And the judge has to determine who to give the daughter to. It should be a slam dunk, but it isn't because of the financial status of things. And it all wraps up with a connection to the politician's brother at the end. But just the fact that you see his daughter grow, his adopted daughter grow from when she was a baby to this 10, 11-year-old girl, and how it brings out the dad in Steve Martin that we knew was in his character, but was pushed down because of his betrayal. Right. You see that he's a good dad, and eventually Catherine O'Hara has been flirting with him, and now eventually he flirts back with her. So now they're starting to date kind of off and on. And she has a son who's around the same age as Steve Martin's daughter. So they have, a little kind of, they're 10. So it's just a little fun little stuff together. But it's a highly dramatic film, which has some moments of levity in it, but it's something that's not atypical Steve Martin, but Steve Martin absolutely kills it. He's fantastic in the movie. It's got a great supporting cast. I've already said Catherine O'Hara. Gabriel Byrne plays the politician. Laura Linney plays his wife. And the brother is played by Stephen Baldwin. So it's not your typical film. It's shot in a kind of weird filtery way, and it's sort of, to me, it's sort of like in the 80s early. It's supposed to take place like in the early 80s. The film came out in the mid 90s, and but it's like a period piece in the early 80s, and it's like this small town in Virginia. But just the relationship and all the stuff that happens when the court case happens, and what is to determine who is the best dad for the daughter. Is it the dad who's there, took care of her, has done almost everything for her, but maybe can't afford to send her to a good university where she can become more because she's highly smart? Or do you give her to the dad who is stable, is rich, is a politician, so he's very family oriented, whatever, and will be able to provide for her to give her a better future? So it becomes this really bitter court battle, and it's not an easy film to watch because it really gets you, it really hits you. The first half isn't too bad, but when you start getting the court case, it really starts to hit you, and then the ending is really just, it's almost a tearjerker almost, but in a good way. But it's a great film, and it's highly underrated, and I'm going to keep shouting this to the mountains. Everyone should check out A Simple Twist of Fate. It's a great film, and Steve Martin is a great dad in this.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I did see that movie once a long time ago, and I forgot about it. Yeah, it really is a great movie. Yeah.
And I can understand it's fairly forgettable because it's not your typical Steve Martin, and it's shot in a very murky, filtery style, so that it's kind of got this grainy, dark to it. And I don't know, I guess that was done by the director, and there's not like the wild and crazy guidelines or the craziness of Steve Martin. It's a more down to earth Steve Martin, and a Steve Martin we've never seen before. And I think that's why it wasn't successful, is because everybody wants to see Steve Martin as the George Banks in Follow the Bride. They want to see him as the wild and crazy guy, where this is more of a down-to-earth Steve Martin, and he kills it in the film. And it's hard to watch. It's one of those films that's just real hard. So I'm sorry I went off on a tangent on that, but I love the film, and I really wish more people would see it.
Yeah, definitely.
Number 2.
Okay, my number 2 is Daniel Hillard. I don't know if that name sounds familiar to you.
No.
So, Daniel Hillard is a voice actor living in San Francisco. And one day he quits his job.
I know what it is now. I know what it is now.
He quits his job and he's very irresponsible. And it's because he's a jokester and he likes to have fun and he's a big kid. And he loves his children to death and wants to have fun with them. He wants to be their pal. And so Lydia, Chris, and Natalie think that that's great and wonderful and awesome. But his wife, Miranda, gets very frustrated with him. So one day, Miranda comes home from work, and he was expected to do X, Y, and Z, whatever it was. But instead, there's this big, huge kids' party going on for his son. But this is the same son who had gotten bad grades, on the report card. So he wasn't supposed to have a party. Well, Miranda gets so mad that that's her last straw. And so she files for divorce from Daniel. This, devastates him. He has a really hard time with it. He can't accept it at all. He hates that he can only see them when the court says he can see them or when Miranda says he can see them. And he's got to figure out how to work around this. So he gets this idea. Well, she gets in a jam because she's, an interior designer. And she gets, she's just really involved in her projects. And so it gets to the point where she needs to find help. She needs to find a nanny. So Daniel, being the voice actor that he is, and I think it's his brother-in-law that does masks and
Harvey Fierstein, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like for movies or whatnot. He gets the idea, well, what if I disguise myself as Mrs. Doubtfire, a Scottish nanny? And that way, if she hires me, I'll be able to see my kids. Yeah, it's dishonest because they're going to think I'm this little old Scottish woman, but at least I'm with them and I'm spending time with them. So she hires her, him, her, and he's amazing. He is the nanny, the woman of Miranda's dreams. And, the healthy dinners, helping the kids with the homework, caring for them, keeping them safe and happy. And, I won't say much more. I mean, most people probably have seen this movie by now, but, there's lots of stuff that goes on throughout the movie. And it's just very ironic because even Miranda kind of falls for her, and really it's her ex-husband. But, it's just an incredible movie. He's an incredible father. He does so much growing as a father through the, whatever the time frame of the movie is. And the ironic thing is he does all his growing as a man when he's portraying a woman. And he loves his kids so much that he is willing to do absolutely anything for them. And, he figured out what a good solution or a decent solution to give his kids a good life, be able to be with them, and sort of help them also get through the divorce, which was, it's very tough on a kid. And he's my number 2. He is just a great, great dad.
I am shocked that I totally forgot about Mrs. Doubtfire. I'm shocked I forgot about him. He would have been on my list, absolutely. It is such a great movie, and he does such a good job. And I'm going to add just one little quick spoiler for those who haven't seen it.
Sure.
Two of the 3 kids discover that it is their dad.
Yeah.
So
except for the little one. Yeah.
And that works because that way they know that their dad is not being some deadbeat who's not wanting to spend time with them and be with them, that he wants to be with them so much that he's putting on this ridiculous outfit and this ridiculous accent and basically lying, which is true, which is good, but it's a way to solve a problem that he can't see his kids. And so I like that because they're able to realize that he does truly care for them, and that he will go to any lengths he can to be with them. And it is such a great movie. And it's also great because it doesn't have your typical happy ending. And I like that. And that's what makes it more realistic. It has a happy enough ending, but it doesn't have your standard Hollywood happy ending where, we're all gonna get back together and be one big happy family.
Yeah,
exactly. And I like that. I like that a lot. And I think the last scene is one of my favorite scenes in the film.
Yes.
When he's leaving with the kids, and then the Mrs. Doubtfire is doing her speech on TV. It's such a and Chris Columbus is such a great director, and he did such a great job with the film, and it is a brilliant film. And once again, I am totally shocked. I totally forgot about Mrs. Doubtfire, but that is a brilliant choice. And number 2 is about appropriate. I think would be the best spot where I probably would end up of putting him in there as well. However, my number 2 is one of my very few TV dads. Probably one of the, not the most famous TV dad of the 80s. We're not going to talk about him because he's in a bit of trouble right now. But one of the other big 80s dads that a lot of people, I doubt, haven't forgotten about, but might not have been thinking about too much, Stephen Keaton from Family Ties.
I
and
hated
it is,
it.
and
I hated it.
you didn't like Family Ties?
I didn't like that they were. No, I liked the show, but I didn't like that they were hippies. That always bothered me as a kid.
But that's the brilliance of it, though.
Alex P. Keaton is the Republican. No, I get it. That whole
exactly, yeah. And this you're not sure.
This.
You're not your typical. It's not your typical dad,
right?
And family. They were the hippies that were raised as hippies and decide we're going to have a family and we're going to raise them, as one big happy commune, big happy family. 70s love, peace, all this stuff. It didn't quite work out that way,
right?
And they end up having to adjust. But that's one of the great things about it, is that their willingness to adjust to what's going on, because as you said, for those who don't know, Steve and Elise are former hippies who met in college, got married, and end up having 3 kids. Their oldest is Alex P. Keaton, played by the awesome Michael J. Fox, one of my favorite actors of all time, and probably his first iconic role he's ever done.
Yeah.
And it's a role that I think a lot more people, that and Marty McFly, are the 2 roles that most people remember him from. When you say Michael J. Fox, those are the 2. Marty McFly, I think, is a little bit ahead of Alex, but Alex is still one of those iconic characters. He's a strident Republican, which goes against everything that his parents believed in. And so they have to adjust to his mindset. And the fact that he's super smart and actually has good points to try to prove his point about how they're wrong and he's right, even though his viewpoint is different than theirs, he can back up his claims with his knowledge. And then you've got Mallory, who's the middle child, who is totally a mess, ditzy, but with a heart of gold. And then you've got Tina Youther's character, I forget what her name is, who is your 3rd child, youngest child. She has kind of a character, but to be honest, it focuses more on the 3 kids. Alex and Mallory are the 2 that get the most time, especially Alex, because as soon as Michael J. Fox took on the role, he made it so iconic and so popular that they had to keep putting Alex in. And the fact is, and that makes sense, not just because it's Michael J. Fox, but he is the enemy according to his parents. But they can't hate him because it's their flesh and blood. And so it's just all the conflict comes between their belief systems, and they still love him, but they kind of hate what he stands for, But that's where, not just Stephen, but Elise also, but we're talking about dad, Stephen Keaton does a good job of trying to make his point about why this should be done and why Alex is wrong. But at the same time, he's willing to keep his mind open to Alex's point of view. But that doesn't mean he's any less of a father to Alex. And Alex understands that too. He loves his parents. He thinks they're morons, but he still loves them and would never say that, and would stuff like that. And same thing, even though they don't agree with what Alex says, Stephen and Elise would do anything for their son. Yeah. And it's just the fact that you have 2 different point of views that are totally on the different spectrum, that you're able to have this family unit that is successful, because they are a very happy family despite their arguments and their disagreements. they still are a family and they still act like a true family. And that's why, yeah, Steven's on my number 2.
That's good reasoning. Good reasoning. I was just as a kid, I don't know why it just always bothered me. It was like my little girl Geri was always bothered by them. I watched the show. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, my number 1 was Father of the Bride, was George Banks. And you pretty much summed it up. You summed it up perfectly. You know, all the reasons why he is a great dad. Obviously, I think so too, because he's my number 1. What I'll bring up is my 2 favorite scenes. My favorite scene from Father of the Bride was when she comes home to announce her engagement. And when he turns and he looks at her, he doesn't see her as a 21-year-old, but as a little girl. It's like, and Daddy, we found love and we're going to get married. And it's just so touching because he's looking at her and he sees her as the little girl version of her. And that's so sweet. And my favorite scene in Father of the Bride 2 was, without giving it away, the very special gift that he has made for her baby. You know, it turns out to be a son.
Yeah.
It's very, very sweet. I'm not going to say what it is for people who haven't seen it, but just so endearing, and just, you know, just sums up more of what you had already said about him as a person and as a father, and just beautifully done.
And it fits exactly with the character also. This gift harkens back to the relationship that he had with his daughter, and it's the conclusion to it is great. And since we're talking about it, my 2 favorite scenes in Father of the Bride, I have 2. The one is where it's the night before her wedding and she's playing basketball outside, and he joins her because they had played lots of basketball, you know, bonding as, you know, father and daughter, and they have a little game of one-on-one, and it's like a passing of the baton. You know, it's like, okay, this is actually, you know what, I should probably go backwards because I'll go backwards later. But so it's like the passing of the baton is like, okay, this is the last time I'm probably going to be able to do this with her as my daughter and not as a married woman, that type of thing. And then when it ends and they're tired and they're just like looking at each other and they know that this is going to be the last time each other, that's when the snow comes. And that's just fantastic for when you see the movie, it's California and something that it doesn't happen. And the snow hits when you don't expect it, because not expecting snow in California. It hits the night before and during the day of her wedding. So of course that adds to what happens at the wedding. Now I should have done this one first, and now I'm going to go back slightly. My other favorite scene is the scene right before that one, the basketball one, where he's in bed sleeping and he can't sleep because, you know, his daughter's going to get married the next day, and he starts remembering all the
montage.
Yeah, the montage of her coming down the stairs and the prom dress and graduation and all this stuff. So that's neat. And my favorite scene still in I already covered partially what it is in Father Bride 2, where he's standing alone in the hallway waiting to see what happens with his kids. I also like the scene where he and Martin Short are sliding across the hallway back and forth, running back and forth to see their daughter. So that's great.
And I just thought of why Hans was in number 2, because remember how the whole pattern of George Banks being cheap?
Yeah.
The wife hired him to build the nursery above the garage. And then it becomes this really elaborate, and he's like, well, no, all I need is a crib. And it's this, you know, follows the same pattern as planning the wedding, but this time they're planning out this crazy nursery for the new baby.
But at the end though, at first he's taken aback by that, but in the end it actually helps him out because he has to take care of both his wife and daughter, and he still has to go to work. So he feels, and he says, you know, I find it might be weird for me to say, but I find it more comfortable that he's there with them when I'm not with them, because someone is actually with them and he helps them out. And then you see them doing aerobics and stuff like that. So it's great. And Martin Short's absolutely great in that. And he and Steve Martin have always had really good chemistry, and they've done a couple movies together, and it's really great. My number 1 is one we also talked about also, is Mr. Mom, Jack Butler. Michael Keaton is one of my favorite actors. I also think he's underrated. I think he's starting to get back up to being a highly rated again with Birdman, and he's got some other big stuff coming up later on. But I've always liked Michael Keaton, and I'll be the first to admit it, when he was announced to be Batman, I was one of the guys that was, Michael Keaton is Batman, that's stupid, he's Beetlejuice, blah, 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 like that. But eventually when I actually saw it, I actually liked what he did with Batman, and
I
it's
liked
still
it
one of my
too.
favorite versions.
Yeah.
But before that, he was a young stand-up comedian who was trying to, break into movies. And I find this funny also. I don't know if you know this, Jerry. His real name is, and he, when he went to Hollywood, he knew obviously that there was a Michael Douglas already. So he had to come up with a stage name. I think he legally changed it to his stage name. And the funny thing is, speaking of Follow the Bride, he heard about Diane Keaton. He's like, Keaton's a pretty good name, so I'm gonna get Michael Keaton. And it's also funny, people come up to him and ask him about his sister Diane, and he goes with it. He's like, yeah, Diane's fine. I saw her last week. Everything's great. They think that Diane Keaton and him are related, which is really funny. But Mr. Mom was like the first, technically second big film he was in. Night Shift was the first one that he was in, but that was more of a minor role. Mr. Mom really showed his range. And in Night Shift, he was the crazy psycho blah 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 guy, and it was basically Henry Winkler's movie anyway. But it's this young punk kid, blah 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 blah. I'm just crazy. Wow, I'm crazy. I'm insane. And then he goes and does Mr. Mom. And it's a totally different character. He plays, as you said, a car guy who gets laid off, says, I can take care of the kids. Why don't you go? And she says, I'm going to go, go into work. And his wife does. And she's very successful, as you said. And he has, absolute trouble. And you begin to think, okay, he's going to be one of these doofus dads who he doesn't know how to take care of the kids. But let's face it, it was 1983. This was fairly unusual. And yeah, it was still a time that maybe the wives took more care of the family, and the dads didn't quite know as much. So it made sense that he might not understand. But I love how you see his progression, and then finally he has that epiphany, where he thinks he gets shot, because he's having an affair with Ann Jillian, and turns out that that's his epiphany for him, and he shaves and he burns his awful shirt, and he becomes more of a loving husband again, and becomes a great dad, and paints the fence, and gets his kids up, and is able to get his kids off having their blankets, and and taking care, and learn, and knowing how to do it. And he does the crosswalk thing after he has a problem with being a crossing guard. He becomes the crossing guard, and it's such a great shift in his character, and it's a logical shift because he's done this for a while. He hasn't been doing a good job, and then it looks like that he might be losing his wife because of his attitude and the way he's acting, and he's still kind of depressed about not being the breadwinner anymore, and she's making probably more money than he did when he was working, and he's depressed about it, so he just does it the wrong way. But then he realizes that he loves his wife, he loves his kids, and it's his job to make sure his kids become good. And the first way to do that is you can't have a slovenly dad, unshaven, messy house, not giving a damn about anything. You got to practice what you preach, You need to clean your house. You need to make your beds. You need to, you need to get up. You got to do your job. And I have to be the one to show you that I'm doing it as well, and not just goofing off, whatever. I'm actually working to do it. And he does. And just that epiphany is so brilliant. And then I love the fact that when he thinks his wife is having the affair with Martin Mull, her boss, and it's a misunderstanding, and he knows that Ann Jillian, who's the neighbor, is waiting on his bed, and she wants him, and he's in the shower, and he starts having his conversation in his head about how he can't, should he have this affair? So he sits in the bathroom for like 10 minutes, just ABC, trying to come up with, about why, being that, it's okay to have an affair. It's all right. It'll be good, and then he starts going through everything. He starts thinking about the kids. And then the great thing is, at the very end, he says, you, sir, are in love with your wife and your family. And if you did this, it would ruin everything. So you're going to go out there. You're going to say, sorry, get out of my room. I'm not interested or whatever. And then, of course, he goes out there, and there's his wife who has come back because there was a misunderstanding. And then eventually they have a nice little conflict where they're getting all their dirty laundry out, and then eventually they reconnect and they become the happy family again. And it is such a great movie. So Mr. Mom, Jack Butler is my number one. So good. We had a couple of similar ones. It's always good, and it's good to have different viewpoints. So let me reiterate again for those who are watching. This is just Geri and I's opinion. We tend to focus more on more recent things because everybody knows about, Mr. Brady and all the other epitome of great fathers and stuff like that. We didn't ignore them, but it seems pretty obvious that if you did a list of top 10 dads, Mr. Brady would be up there, and even Atticus Finch, that was the name I'm thinking of from To Kill a Mockingbird. He would be up there as well. It's fairly predictable. And we like to try to be a little less predictable. And also we like to talk about these shows and movies that, people might not have seen and give you a different perspective of things. So that's why, you might be looking at our list saying, really, you picked these guys over Mr. Brady? It's like, well, no, we understand. Or Mr. Cunningham, stuff like that. No, we understand. We get it. And they're good dads. But let's face it, they are your predictable picks. And we like to be unpredictable.
Yes.
And I think we did a good job. So on that note, we finished early. Yay! Geri and I don't have a topic for next month yet. We'll be chit-chatting a couple of weeks trying to figure something out. So I have nothing off the top of my head right now. But we'll figure something out eventually. So we'll be back sometime in mid-July. Don't know exactly when. Could be Saturday, could be Sunday, depending upon vacations and other stuff going on. But we will be back. So don't you worry. Don't you worry. So if you like this show, we'll be back in about a month. Everyone be prepared. The greatest day in history is coming up next Saturday. It's my birthday, June 20th. The greatest absolute day in history is my birthday. So it's coming up on Saturday. Sunday the 21st is Father's Day. I normally would do my Out of My Head show where I just sit and chat about whatever, but due to MJ's emergency last week, I've just shifted MJ down to that spot. I'm just going to skip my Out of My Head this month, which is fine, because my head is fairly empty right now. But so next week, next Sunday, I'll have to verify with MJ, but we'll be back with Dylan Knows Comics. MJ and I will be discussing some of the big news going on in comics world. Hopefully, and I have to verify this, the weekend after that is my international show with Bronwyn. I have to still see if she's up for it because her father passed away last month. So we'll see if she's up for it or not. If not, maybe then I'll do my Out of My Head then. We'll see. And then join us back here mid-July. Geri and I will have another list and more fun. So thank you guys for watching. Geri, thanks for hanging out again. A great list as usual.
Thank you for having me, and I wish you a happy early birthday. Happy early greatest day coming up.
Absolutely greatest day ever. So we will see you all later. Yep. And have a good one. And happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there.
Yep. Happy Father's Day.
Bye-bye.